I have an interesting relationship with Captain America the Winter Soldier. For a long time, like many others, I thought it was one of Marvel's best films. But as I've gotten older, I'm starting to feel less enamored by it every time I watch it. Don't get me wrong, I still like this film and it's certainly on the upper spectrum of Marvel movies. But is it the best that Marvel has to offer? Is it even the best Captain America movie? I don't think so. And I'm going to tell you why. This review is part of a series I'm doing where I revisit every Captain America movie before Brave New World comes out. I already reviewed The First Avenger, which is my favorite Captain America movie, so subscribe and go check out that review when you finish watching this one. But back to The Winter Soldier. I don't want to make everyone angry right away, so I'll start with what I like about the movie, and I promise there's a lot. First and foremost, the feeling of tension achieved throughout this movie is perfect. The score for this film is so eerie, and it blends perfectly with the grounded and gritty action scenes that take place during the first half of the movie. You really believe Nick Fury might die during the first confrontation, and that tension only heightens with his quote-unquote dying words to Cap to trust no one. You start to wonder if Black Widow is trustworthy or if Nick Fury really did the bad things that Pierce said he did. All of these decisions make Cap's moral compass the baseline for this film, and we learn who is worthy of trust through his eyes. This movie doesn't come out and tell you that anyone in this story should be unequivocally considered a good person, but Steve's acceptance of those in his inner circle tells us as viewers that we can trust them too. But while we as viewers believe Cap from the start, Steve takes some time to feel comfortable with his new place in the world. Almost everyone he knew in his previous life is dead, and even though Peggy is still alive, time is catching up with her in front of Steve's eyes, which is arguably even more painful. On top of how this affects his personal life, S.H.I.E.L.D. is constantly telling Steve that the world has changed and he needs to change along with it. I think this climaxes brilliantly when Steve talks to Sam Wilson outside of Sam's support group for veterans, and Sam casually asks Steve, "What makes you happy?" And Steve responds, "I don't know." The filmmakers conveyed Steve's inner conflict so well in this movie, and I think telling this kind of story was the perfect choice for Cap's second movie. He's already the perfect guy, we know this, so putting him at odds with the world and having him overcome his doubts by realizing he has to trust himself is just so poetic. It's so much more interesting than if they would have just had him fight a battle and save America from some foreign power twice in a row. Cap fighting back against his own country in the name of what's right is what Captain America is all about, and I just love that. Like I've said before on this channel, my favorite type of superheroes are the ones that do good simply to do good. I don't need another tragic backstory. Cap's sense of what is right is on full display in this story, and I love how as he approaches S.H.I.E.L.D. for the final battle, he sends a message to the building because he believes that good people still work there and can help in his fight. His trust and love for people is unyielding, even after having endured so many detractors who are against him, and I think that trait is beautiful in its simplicity. I get the same feeling in The Dark Knight when the people in the boats decide not to blow each other up. It just gives me a warm and fuzzy feeling that there will always be good in humanity if you look for it. Another thing I love about this movie is how they deal with Bucky. I feel like I've seen so many stories where a character comes back from the dead, is suddenly on the opposite team, and then they switch sides at the last minute because their memory conveniently starts working again. And this movie has some of those tropes, but the filmmakers dealt with this in a much more satisfactory way. Bucky recognizes Steve almost immediately after Steve says his name, and he starts to ask questions to his superiors the next time he sees them. This conveys how flimsy his brainwashing is when it comes to his own past, so when it happens again later in the story, it doesn't feel like a writer is just deciding that Bucky remembers Steve out of nowhere. I also love that the Winter Soldier doesn't save the day in the end. He doesn't become the one who turns the tides and stops Hydra. Steve is still able to be the hero, as he should be, and he achieves his goal even while Bucky is still against him. It would have been very easy to discredit Steve's impact on the story by having Bucky be too important. Yes, he does end up saving Steve's life in the end, but that feels like a welcome addition to the story that brings things full circle from the last movie, where Steve wasn't able to do the same for him. But there is one thing concerning Bucky that has dampened the experience for me over time, and that's the fact that this movie relies very heavily on one big reveal. When I was in the theater 11 years ago and the Winter Soldier's mask got pulled off, the theater went berserk, almost animalistic, and I look back at that as one of the coolest in-theater experiences I've ever had. But that is an impact you can only feel once with this movie, and subsequent viewings don't hit as hard. This isn't something that just affects this movie. There are plenty of movies that are crafted specifically for first-time viewing, and I can't really fault this movie too much for making that choice, but that doesn't change the fact that my personal excitement for watching this movie has gone down over time. There are also many other more glaring issues with this movie that I've started to notice over time, and that's what I want to get into now. First of all, the humor in this movie does not land in the same way that it did in the first Avenger. I compliment that movie a lot for not forcing too many jokes into the script and allowing it to maintain a certain level of seriousness. But The Winter Soldier does not have that same philosophy. The jokes are noticeably amped up here, as if the writers needed to hit a quota. I can't tell you how many times in my recent rewatch that I rolled my eyes at this script. One example of this is when Nick Fury is being cornered by the SWAT team in the middle of broad daylight. When they start to break into his SUV with the battering ram, you as the viewer are like, oh my god, this is serious. And just as this tension is building, the stupid car AI decides to start making quips. Nick Fury asks what systems are still online, and the car just goes, air conditioning is fully operational. Like, did they just expect us to crack up at that line? What point does it serve? And it wouldn't be that bad if there were just a few instances of this, but I really do feel like this movie is held down by its comedy throughout. When Black Widow is bringing up girls for Steve to date during the opening boat mission, it's a little annoying, but it's fine. When she's still doing it hours into the movie during otherwise very serious moments, it gets a little bit old. There's also that one infamous scene where the guy from S.H.I.E.L.D. gets saved on the boat, and he just goes, I told you. S.H.I.E.L.D. doesn't negotiate, to the guy who literally just got shot and killed in front of him. The increased attempts at humor were one of the first things I noticed on my rewatch, and I really didn't expect that to be the case when I went in. I always had thought that Marvel movies got more jokey after Guardians of the Galaxy came out, but I guess that it started sooner. I won't say that the humor is all bad, though. There are still some funny moments. The movie opening with Steve running laps around Falcon and saying, on your left, is classic. And I thought Natasha's jokes about Steve being a fossil were funny, too. So there are definitely some moments, but they are too few and far between. The next thing that I've soured on is the action in this movie, but only some of it. I think everything before the manhunt for Steve begins is perfect. I have no problems with the boat scene, the Nick Fury car scene, Steve's chase after Bucky, and of course the iconic elevator scene. All of those fights feel semi-grounded in reality. You feel the weight of the punches, and as I've said before, the tension is very real. But pretty much everything after that just feels overdone to me, especially when compared with how action is used in the beginning. I only ever really have a problem with action scenes when their sole purpose is for the character to look cool, when they don't inform the story at all. And unfortunately, there is a lot of that here. The first moment I remember feeling this way was right after the elevator scene when Cap leaves the S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters. Hydra sends a Quinjet to meet him on the bridge and fire shots at him so he doesn't leave. So what does Captain America do? He throws his shield into the propeller, jumps off his motorcycle onto the jet, destroys the exhausts, and then jumps off the jet into a superhero landing. And yeah, it's cool visually. I don't really have a problem with that. There's tons of bold stunts like this in the first Avenger, and I love those. But this just doesn't feel necessary. We as the audience had just seen Steve take down all of those Hydra troops in the elevator, and then we saw him leap from the elevator down like 40 stories to land on his shield. What does the Quinjet scene add that wasn't already shown in those previous scenes? It's solely there for Steve to have a cool superhero moment, and that's the type of stuff that annoys me. This isn't the only moment like that either. A lot of the action on the helicarriers feels excessive in the same way, particularly the scenes with Falcon. I'm not saying that it's impossible to have cool action scenes with Falcon. In fact, I think they're done really well visually. But having him zoom around the helicarriers attracting missile shots just feels like too much when compared with the first half of this movie and its grounded action. It's natural to want to ramp up the action throughout the movie, but this feels like things went from 0 to 100 way too quickly. There's also a scene where Rumlow, Frank Grillo's character, tries to have this unnecessary fight with Falcon toward the end, and then Falcon has to jump from a building to avoid the helicarrier crash. Compare this to when Bucky is chasing down Nick Fury's SUV. That scene achieves so much more with so much less. And I totally admit that this could just be a personal preference, but I know a lot of people tout the action in this movie very highly, and I'm not sure if they would agree upon a 2025 rewatch. The last point that I want to hang my hat on is that I hate the fact that S.H.I.E.L.D. recruited Dr. Zola from the first Avenger as one of their scientists. If you don't remember, when Cap and Black Widow go to investigate what was on Nick Fury's USB drive, they go to a bunker in Camp Lehigh where S.H.I.E.L.D. was founded. They find a hidden level underneath the ground that was apparently where Hydra first came back to life under the nose of S.H.I.E.L.D., and Dr. Zola's consciousness was uploaded into an AI that greets Steve and Natasha as they walk through the door. And there is so much wrong with this scene on so many levels that it makes the entire premise of the movie feel less tight as a result. Like I said before, this all comes about because S.H.I.E.L.D. recruited Dr. Zola as a part of something called Operation Paperclip. Apparently, this was a real initiative after World War II, where the US took most of the German scientists to the States because they didn't want Germany to retain that kind of knowledge. And I guess it's kind of cool that the writers incorporated this real-life thing that happened, but I can't walk away from this scene without thinking about how dumb S.H.I.E.L.D. must have been to take the literal scientists from Hydra that aided the Red Skull. Peggy Carter, Howard Stark, and Chester Phillips from the first movie are the ones who founded S.H.I.E.L.D. And do I think they'd ever in a million years approve Dr. Zola to be S.H.I.E.L.D. scientist? Not 1 ounce of me believes that. If I'm stretching for rationale, maybe it wasn't their calling, maybe this was a top-down military decision that they couldn't change. But even in that case, wouldn't you have a little more faith in Peggy Carter and Howard Stark to not let Dr. Zola overtly infect S.H.I.E.L.D. with Hydra propaganda? This discredits all of the main people that we had confidence in throughout the first movie, and I refuse to believe that any of those characters would let that happen. And I know they kind of address this in the movie and they show how Hydra eliminated Howard Stark, but I don't think that's good enough. To me, this scene exists as a flimsy rationale to explain why Hydra is back in the world, and I just have to believe there could have been a better way to do this. Not to mention how Dr. Zola's AI reveals his entire scheme to quote-unquote stall for time, only to get blown up 10 seconds later. And then the cherry on top is when Steve somehow protects Black Widow from dying after the missile strike, and then carries her out from the bunker where they must have been hundreds of feet under collapsed stone. I don't care how much of a super soldier you are, that type of cave-in is killing you 100 out of 100 times. This whole scene is a classic example of telling, not showing, and the whole movie suffers for it. The backstory it provides hinges on the fact that characters we believe are smart are actually astoundingly dumb, and when you realize that all of this could have been avoided by simply keeping Zola away from S.H.I.E.L.D., which all of these characters should have done anyway, the whole plot of this movie just feels a little less necessary. Of course, you can make the argument that without this having happened, we never would have gotten this movie in the first place. But to that I'd say, there are certainly ways that Hydra could have come back without having to rely on one extraordinarily dumb decision. I would have even been fine with Zola being taken in by some other branch of the US government and having Hydra sprout from there. But since he was taken in by S.H.I.E.L.D., a new organization led by characters we trusted, I simply cannot accept that. Also, I have no idea if this was explained in the Agent Carter show that released since I didn't watch that, but even if it was, I shouldn't have to watch an entire show to explain bad storytelling in a movie that was more widely viewed anyway. And this was never something I cared about or even realized during the first few times I saw this movie, because the plot explanation in this scene isn't super clear, and initially you're more shocked than anything that Zola is still alive in some alternate way. But when you really drill into the details, this part of the movie just does not hold up. And I know I sound like I'm really dogging on the Winter Soldier, but it's only because this movie was so close to being truly great. It's because I care, and because I love this character so much. Most of this movie is great, and I still have an amazing time overall when I put it on. But is it as good as I remember when I was 19? Not even close. But what do you think? Do you still love this movie, or do you see where I'm coming from? Let me know in the comments. Please also like this video and subscribe if you don't hate me. Again, I'm reviewing all of the Captain America movies before Brave New World comes out next week, and you can check out my first Avenger review by clicking on the screen now. Thank you so much for watching, and have a good one.